Thank you. I've worked my career in a variety of cultures and in urban education in the United States, and I've made a switch in recent years to the Pacific and to more rural education, and part of that was to try to understand the similarities and differences between those contexts and the resources and capacities that people bring to educational improvement. It's easy to give up on schools aspirationally. It's easy to say that schools just are not going to do what we want them to do. But schools do represent the best opportunities for social improvement. The work that's described on violence, the amount of money and resources, but not just that, the fact that it's a norm of our lives that our children will go to schools, and that it's the law. It's the law that they will go to schools. It's our job to figure out how to solve these persistent problems of practice, which makes schools not all that they can be. But it's also worth saying that schools do more now for more students than they have ever done. That our aspirations for schools continue to increase. Some of the things that we've learned about schools and how to improve schools has improved. It's that our aspirations continue to outstrip improvement. And for those of us who work in schools, that's a constant challenge, because all of our hopes are in schools. For those of us who work, and if you're a parent and everything else, we all know this. But a lot of people, especially in the States, are ready to give up on schools. I'm going to homeschool. I'm going to do it differently. I completely believe we need to do it differently. I hope that will come through. But I'm also saying that we need to make schools work. That investment, what happens in school happens elsewhere. So let me start with some pandering to this crowd. This is my 4.5-month-old son named Oscar. And I wish that Mary had told me that only babies who were born in the summer get to be Roots of Empathy babies. I might have done something differently. I would love him to be a Roots of Empathy baby, just from what I saw the other day. And I'm happy to say Brenda's coming to Hawaii in a few weeks and needed a spare baby. And I've offered up Oscar. I will do one quasi-advertisement. I work for McCrell International. It's an educational nonprofit. Our headquarters is in Denver, Colorado, but I work in Honolulu, and we have an office that I lead, a team that I lead in Honolulu and Denver that serves the Pacific region, which we'll talk about. But I do want to say that McCrell works in Canada with the Cree Nation. That's not what I do. I've heard that work involves, like, they stay in one house and they climb a snowbank, and then they come down to the school, and then they climb that snowbank and go back to the hotel. I'm willing to do it. I hope that I'm invited to the Cree work, even though it's been kind of cold for me even this week in Toronto. I think it is good work. I think it's culturally responsive work in Canada that continues to gain traction and funding and interest from the ed leaders. We work also, because we're in Denver, we work a lot with Native American groups across those states in the center of the United States. So I'm the director of what's called REL Pacific. It means Regional Educational Laboratory. So this is a little bit tricky, because the REL program is funded by the US Department of Education. And it's funded by what's called the Institute of Educational Sciences. They are the people in the United States who are most concerned about research methodology that Pat was talking about. So there's quite a bit of pressure for rigor and what Michael Fullen was talking about last night with that external accountability, and I'm going to talk about that. my job is actually, as I consider it, to be a bridge between this federal funding, which is organized in one way, and the needs and the uses that make sense in the Pacific. So we translate that funding into something that becomes possible in school improvement in the Pacific. There are 10 of these labs. They call them labs, and I'll explain what the labs do. It's just their nomenclature. They've been around for 50 years, started in 1966. There is no doubt that I lead the most interesting lab in the United States. Okay, you see the blue one in California, it's San Francisco. It's a group called West Ed. Okay, California and Nevada and Arizona and Utah, no doubt there are some differences between those places, but those are not real differences, right? They all speak English, they're all under the same sorts of systems. Where we work, the REL Pacific is really diverse, which we'll see in a second. The mission of the REL is to conduct rigorous research on problems that the constituents care about in the regions in which we serve. So they care about these problems and they want research that's about their systems. I use the term deepening capacity. I don't like capacity building. It implies that there's nothing built, that there's nothing there already. One of the things I loved when I first met Mary when you spoke in Hawaii is you said, we don't build or develop empathy. We catch it. We give kids the chance to express empathy, for it to be okay to empathize. And I think that, in a way, that's the way I think about capacity building. There are some technical elements of capacity building, but in some ways, it's letting people, it's bringing people to the awareness that we're here to support your efforts at improvement. If you need to learn something to do that, we're a resource for that. And dissemination. Ultimately, the goal is to make education a more evidence-centered practice, which I've heard a lot of this week. I've heard a lot about, we're all in the midst of this. I would say personally, my goal is to help people in the Pacific change the life chances of students when they finish high school. Do they have different chances in life because of the energy that we've expended? And I translate this into that. So we serve a really diverse group, right? It's not like California and Arizona. So there's one state, the U.S. state of Hawai'i. There are 3 territories. These are U.S. territories: Guam, American Samoa, and the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. There's been a lot of talk this week, I will say, about Americans below the border. I like to think that I'm not that kind of American, from what I hear, the way you talk about Americans. But I will say, if you were to ask Americans, where's the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands and what's our connection to that joint? That would be like Ed Tronick's blank face. I have no idea. I have no idea where that is, right? We also work in 3 countries that are in what's called free association with the United States. They've signed treaties, agreements, so that their people can work in the United States, and they get funding, they get some funding from the United States, but they also sort of cede certain things to the United States. That's the Republic of Palau, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, and the Federated States of Micronesia. The Federated States is a country, but it's made up of 4 very strong states, which are almost like countries in themselves: Yap, Chuuk, Pohnpei, and Koshrai. So the area that we serve, here's a little map for those who might not have this handy. And I looked this up. From Toronto to Hawaii is about 7,400 kilometers. I put that in kilometers instead of miles because I'm trying to be culturally responsive, and Google helps with that. But from Hawaii on the right to Palau, the most distant place that I commute to, is 7,600 kilometers. So it's as far from Hawaii to get to work in Palau as it is from Toronto to Hawaii, a little further. That's Papua New Guinea underneath Palau, and that's the Philippines near Palau. These countries are not only influenced by the United States, they're very much connected to Asia, to China, to the groups in Asia, and especially Palau is connected to Taiwan. But a lot of people, including our Korean friends here, might know Palau because Palau is filled with Japanese and Korean scuba divers. It's one of the preeminent places in the world to scuba dive. This gives another idea. Hawaii is up on the top. The continental United States doesn't cover where our lab works. American Samoa is down on the bottom, and that's the only one in the South Pacific that we serve. Extreme distances. So in order to do the work that we do in the REL, we support what are called research alliances. They're groups of people, educators, they can be community activists, they can be from the government sectors, the departments of labor, the directors of education of the systems, who come together on a problem and try to work through that problem to make progress on that challenge. College and career readiness, the improvement of teaching, how to get parents and communities engaged in schools, how to use data more formatively for improvement. This is an example. Here's American Samoa on the left, and this is Koshrai in the Federated States of Micronesia on the right. The woman on the left is one of our staff members from Hawaii, and I'm on the right in that other one. You get a sense of where we are. It's hard to imagine some of what goes on in the Pacific. One of the things I want to say is we aggregate when we think about the Pacific. There's the Pacific. And sometimes it's useful to aggregate like that, and sometimes it's really important to recognize within these jurisdictions and between them, they have very different things going on, and there are really different needs for what they need and what they expect and what they want. So I think I mentioned this. These are the priority areas. The one I didn't mention, which we're going to talk about today, is Pacific Indigenous education. These are driven both in combination of local needs, but also they are funder priorities at the national level from the IES, from the U.S. Department of Education. But how they look and what they're about in each jurisdiction depends on the local context. And that's part of our job, is to localize this. I don't know if I told you or not, I'm a white man working in the Pacific. I'm not from Hawaii. And I don't pretend to be Hawaiian. I don't pretend to be of the Pacific. It's very important to me that nobody in the Pacific perceives that to be the case. I am a supporter of the Pacific people and their rights to quality schooling and to increase chances. But one of the things that I do as a person who works in contexts that are really diverse, really different, is I don't pretend that that's the case. I try to be authentic and genuine, and that usually works. In fact, the Pacific people say, I'm sick of people coming in here and saying we, and saying, I know you don't speak my language. I do say, again, I'm multilingual. I know what it is to learn other languages, but it's really tough in the regions that we serve. So they call this talking story in the Pacific, but I'll tell you a story. So this was before I was within the REL. So they bring together the leaders of these jurisdictions, and they ask them, what do you want? What do you need? What do you want? you know, and in the Pacific, people don't speak directly. They don't always say what they want, what's going on. And so there's this pressure, like these big, as they call them, white chiefs are over on this one side, and the leaders are over there, and they say, what do you want, you know, and so finally one of them stands up and says, so Dr. Malone, America is asking us now what we want? You know, it's a very hard position that we've inherited, that the people in the REL have inherited, right? And I don't mean like it's a hard position like poor us. It's a challenge to figure out how to genuinely interact and to be empathetic with the people that we serve, and in a way that's not misinterpreted. So one of the things that Hau'ofa talks about is when Westerners looked at the map of the Pacific, they see a blue ocean with some dots in it. And the presumption is these dots are so far apart, there's nothing there, that it's going to be almost impossible for anything to come from that. It's going to be impossible for it to develop. It's going to be impossible for the resources and the distances, and there are these different languages, and there's these different differences. What he said is that many Pacific people don't see the sea and dots. They see a sea of islands, many, many islands spread across the Pacific that they have sailed to, that they have traded with for hundreds of years, and that they are connected to. So here's a little piece of Hawaiiana that you know. Aloha. When I say aloha, what do you say? Aloha. So talofa. Talofa is American Samoa, which you must know. Talofa and aloha, they mean the same thing. They come from the same, and even in New Zealand, it's what is it, kia ora? Yeah, it's considered the same root. So there are amazing connections within and across Polynesia and Micronesia and Melanesia that historically, as we're hopping island to island to get the Japanese, we tended to overlook. What do you see when you look at maps of the Pacific? What do I see? What do you see? What does he see? And he argues that until we see it as a sea of islands with the resources and capacities for our own determination, we are sort of doomed by this Western idea of distance and non-connection. And when you work in the Pacific, it's kind of amazing. I'm in let's say a bar in American Samoa, and I see one of my guys or his brother from the CNMI. I mean, the distance is so large, but they're visiting each other, they're learning from each other, they're talking to each other. Do you know this? This is the hokalea. The hokalea is a classic Hawaiian canoe from the 1970s. It's right now, of all things, it's in Yorktown. Well, I think it was 2 days ago. It was in Yorktown, Virginia, which was a battle in the Revolutionary War. They sailed from Hawaii to Samoa to New Zealand to Australia, around the Cape. They sailed to Brazil. They sailed to Cuba. They've gone up to Yorktown. They're going to come into the Statue of Liberty in New York City this summer. No instruments still, even in the Atlantic. Stars, tides, birds. And they're stopping in New York this summer, and then they're going like through the Panama Canal and back home. They've been on the road for two years. But this ship, in the 1970s, the view of the Pacific was that Hawaii was discovered by accident by people who got lost in a storm off South America. Thor Heyerdahl. And there were people in Hawaii who said, well, that's ridiculous. That's not what happened. We know that because we've had our oral tradition of how we got to this place, and it went back 1,000 years. But what they did is they found one of the last navigators. The islands had been cut off from navigation. He lived in Yap, which I mentioned earlier. His name is Mao. He trained these men and women in Hawaii, the 1970s. Even in the 1970s, it was women also, but it was mostly men. And they sailed, they learned, and they sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti without instruments in the 1970s. That wasn't the beginning, but it was a very symbolic part of the Hawaiian Renaissance. So what happened after that was there was a constitutional convention in '78, and this ship represented a reclaiming of history and the beginning of a journey which continues in Hawaii today, and of which I'm going to talk a little bit about down the road. When we think about research evidence in Hawaii, here's a fact. In the 1990s, there were almost no students learning in the Hawaiian language or learning in schools that focused on Hawaiian culture. Almost zero. Activists, politicians, groups of people came together, coming out of this kind of movement in the 70s in a series of steps, supported changes in the construction of charter schools, changed the law about charter schools, which are public schools in Hawaii. So in 1990s, zero students learning in Hawaiian, learning culture in Hawaiian. Today, there are 25 plus charter schools, thousands of students every single day learn in Hawaiian. They learn about Hawaii. They are not, this is a point, they are not just looking back towards the great days of Hawaii. They don't want that. It's not just claiming the past. They believe that you need to claim the past as a model of what's possible for the future. This is I think Hawaii is really interestingly positioned in terms of powerful people, in terms of that the history was not gone, that there were enough people who organized and cared enough to really make it so here's one thing. A lot of us who work in Indigenous education, not the people who work in it, I won't say that I can't speak for Canada, but there are a lot of people who, even if you walk through it and you say, I support native language, we say it because we think it's their right to do it. It's a good thing for them, and it's good for us to allow that space to happen. That's not what the Hawaiians are saying. What the Hawaiians are saying is, your focus on math and reading and your flattening of schools and your schooling designed in such a way that there's not interpersonal connection, that there's not respect for older people, that there's not a sense of where you came from and what you're up to, that's the wrong way to educate anybody going forward. And in that sense, the Hawaiians are really in an interesting position because they are not saying, please let us do our little thing. They're saying, if you guys don't do this, you yourselves are in trouble. So one of the things we ask is how well does a US model of education work in the Pacific? If you look at a lot of indicators, the outcomes are not good. In terms of so there are some good things. I mean, people graduate from high school. The graduation rates are actually high. One of the problems that we work on a lot in the REL, if I have time at the end, I'll get to this, is people graduate from high school, they walk across the street to the one community college on the island. They did everything that we asked them as adults to graduate from high school. We took 3 years of math, 4 years of English, blah, blah, blah. I played that game. I smiled at my teachers. I showed up. I graduated. Then you walk across the street and the college says, 95% of you are not ready for college math. Go over here to these developmental remedial courses that don't count for credit, but you need to pass a credit math in order to get any degree. And almost all of them drop out. It's one of the things that we have documented in the REL. This is not just in the Pacific. I don't know about Canada. This is across a lot of the United States. The numbers are higher in the Pacific for a lot of reasons. But it's 60% in Texas. It's 60 to 70% at many community colleges in California. It's 95% in math in the CNMI or in American Samoa. So they're finishing high school, but this is you're talking about counting dead bodies. One of the reasons I like developmental education is it's a binary outcome. When you come into the college, you take a placement exam, you go to credit, or you go to non-credit. So it's sort of easy to count, and we predict it using high school data, and we do a lot like that. But there are a lot of bad outcomes, but there are a lot of assets to leverage in the Pacific. And sometimes I talk about the Pacific, again, I want to be careful. I'm not talking about a unified thing. Hawaii is different than Samoa, is different than the CNMI, is different than the Federated States or Palau or Marshall Islands. Almost every culture in the world says family, 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 and I think that's true. But family in the Pacific has serious implications. The extended family, the closeness of family is a powerful asset and a powerful resource. When those kids come from American Samoa who want to try it in Hawaii, like they want to finish high school in Hawaii or they want to go to college in Hawaii, there's family they can stay with. You just call them on a Friday and say, I'm coming on Monday. You got room? All right, we got room. I like this quote. So understanding the cultural affordances of each place in learning is one of the great challenges that we have. Understanding that some people would learn math if it's focused on canoeing, or if it's focused on national determination through the hokalea, right? When they went down the coast of Africa, they had STEM lessons off the boat. They stopped in Africa, they did STEM. They stopped in the Pacific, they did climate change. They do everything. But figuring this out and then turning this towards a model of education that's focused on numeracy and literacy is another challenge. So this is a quote by Dr. Sean Kaneopuni, who is a technical advisor to the REL, an amazing woman from Kamehameha Schools. She's head of public education outreach, writes a lot about Hawaiian education. And she has a definition. The thing I like about this definition, this evolving from, but not fixed in, the culture. This is what I meant about it's not a backwards-looking movement. It's not just looking for this. There are elements of that. It's not one thing. But there are a lot of people who are arguing this is a forward-looking movement. It evolves from this thing that we had, and we know we continue to want this, and we also think that you should think about it yourselves. So some of the things that we think about when we think about culturally responsive work in the Pacific, I guess I've mentioned a few of them. The history is, Peter mentioned the shadows of history this morning. Even in the bright sunshine of the Pacific, there are a lot of shadows. World War I, but especially World War II, has had a pervasive impact that still is in these jurisdictions. After World War II, the United States had what was called a trust territory under the UN across Micronesia. That led to a lot of issues. There is now movement towards more independence across Micronesia. But there's certainly a history of imperialism, colonialism, not just the United States, but obviously with the United States, with Japan, with Germany, with Spain. And often culture was damaged by this, and culture was, to some extent, they tried to erase the local culture. Localism is an important idea. When I speak to the leaders, the ministers of education, and I show them these reports, or I show them RCTs, because IES tells me to show them some RCTs, they say, they call me Filippo. They say, Filippo, are these Pacific kids? I said, well, they're from Texas. And she goes, so one of the things the REL does is we conduct research on Pacific students. Even that's the data in the Pacific is challenging. Getting the data, doing the studies, we end up typing in high school transcripts for our studies. The data, we made a data system for YAP using FileMaker because they didn't have money to buy a system. There's a lot of that. But one of the accomplishments that we have when we try to think, is there an accomplishment here, is we're doing studies that show how high school preparation is connected to what happens next. And can you predict it using statistics and looking at the data, or even descriptively? Even that there's so little research and there's so little information about the systems that they operate in. That part of it I feel encouraged by. So there's a long history of evangelical movements in the Pacific. Most of the people who came to the Pacific were Christian missionaries. Now there's military missionaries. American Samoa has the highest per capita enlistment rate in the United States of America. The recruiting station in American Samoa has the most number of recruits per capita for the U.S. Armed Forces. It's a dream to go to the U.S. Armed Forces. Number 2, Guam. So there's an expression in America, be all you can be. You join the military. So we are concerned about that expression. When I speak to, one of the things that we do is we try to bring together K-12 people and college people. They're in the same island, but they don't talk to each other. They don't tend to like each other. This one used to be that one's boss. They're intermarried, but they're like personality conflicts. And the students are not actually first. The system is broken. There's no bridge from K-12 to college that the kids can even climb across, forget about walk across. But there are a lot of personal issues. There are a lot of personality issues. But when I stand there, I wonder about this message. Is it be all you can be? Go to college? I like college. I think it's a good thing to go to college. But does it mean be all you can be, go to college, get the heck out of here for a job that's only in Hawaii or it's on the mainland or somewhere else, right? So we're aware of those things, and some of the things that we try to do is work on career development, workforce development, work with local leaders, and think about what are the jobs that would come from these messages. Another big issue that I've talked to some people about this week is we used to think that even going to community college was a way to fight inequality in the United States. If you graduate from community college, maybe you go on to four-year college, or if you don't, you earn more money over the course of your life. But it's also hard now because it's such a struggle to even graduate from community college, but we're not even sure that that makes a difference ultimately in your life chances. We have to have faith that it does for individual people, but when you look at the statistics, it's a little harder now to, you need a four-year degree or more to really change the course of your life. You can't get a four-year degree without a two-year degree. Another big thing that we think about is, I really liked the talk last night from Michael Fullen about this, which is how do you work with schools where you're not in the school? You know, our office is in Hawaii. We fly there several times a year, but we're not, and we communicate all the time, but we're not there. So there's the geographic distance, but there's also the temporal distance. We don't have a role in the school. So we try to think about that, and one of the things we do is we have what are called locally based consultants. We have people on each island who are connected to the school system. Often they were people who worked in the school system, and they support the agenda of the Research Alliance, and we are members of the Research Alliance. So I'll talk quickly about 3 of our projects that sort of demonstrate elements of culturally responsive work in the Pacific. So the first one is the improvement of teaching in Palau. The next one is a culturally based education reform in Hawai'i. And the third one is program evaluation in the Marshalls. In brief, Palau teachers are EL teachers. They have almost all have learned English as a foreign language or as a second language. So there are EL teachers in an EL culture with EL learners as students. So one of the challenges we have is when IES or people say, you know, we have research about EL learners. Well, that's true. There are Spanish-speaking students throughout the United States, especially in Texas and California and Florida, and there are a lot of studies on them. But there's no state in the United States that has an EL teacher workforce, where teachers have learned English, they teach in English to students who are learning English. That's a super big challenge. There's not much in the world in research about what to do in those situations. For adults who've already learned English, they've already graduated from college, and they're teaching in the schools, when their English is not, let's say, optimal for student learning, what do we do? So one of the things we said is, well, let's start thinking about this together. So we work with people from the Ministry of Education. This is often like the associate superintendents, I'm not sure what you would call them here, school principals, some teachers, but it's more at the middle level of the system. So one of the things we said is, I talked to the minister is on our board of directors. Are there teachers that you would say in a Palauan context are effective teachers, are good? I don't like teacher effectiveness. So just, are the teachers that you want? He says, yes, there are teachers like that. So one of the things we said is, let's just look at good teaching in Palau according to your standards, and let's think about developing a way to compare or to identify teachers who are more proficient and less proficient. And then this is the part that turns out to be the hardest part, and we continue to mess this up in the United States. How does any of that energy turn into learning for teachers? How do you design professional learning opportunities from what you said? You guys have said this is effective instruction. So one of our stances, and this is what we mean about culturally responsive, we say there is quality teaching here in Palau. Let's start in Palau. Because sometimes in the Pacific, there's an attitude of, let's just erase this, and let's think about the kind of teachers that we want that are elsewhere, or the kind of practice that we want that's elsewhere. And let's think about that. And one of the things we do is we try to support people who want to say the opposite, which is improvement is who was talking about this week? Maybe it was Fullen or somebody, right? Which is, you can't just replace the teacher workforce. You have to build a teacher workforce. And on an island, you seriously have to cultivate a teacher workforce, right? Because there are only so many people. And there are only so many people who will go to the college for education and then come into the school system. So So we look at national indicators of what good instruction looks like, but we also look at local indicators. So look at this bottom one. One indicator of effective teaching in the Pacific might be the distance a teacher lives from the school. Why might that be? How could that be related to teacher effectiveness? So in that case, effective teachers would live closer to the school. Possibly, right? Yeah, no, I mean, that's possible. There's been talk like that. There's a sort of more basic one, which is if you live far from the school, transportation is such, or storms, or you're taking a boat, it doesn't sail that day, nobody is in the classroom that day, there are no substitutes. So usually teachers who are present are more effective than teachers who are not present. It's not always true, but at a system level it's probably true. But the point is just to try to get people to think broadly and to speak to Washington. When I say this to Washington, this would never be an indicator of good teaching in the United States. You could live 2 hours away, you could live 10 minutes away. That would never go into a principal's judgment about effective teaching or quality teaching, right? And this is only one example. Another one might be, where are you in the social structure? Hierarchy is huge in the Pacific. There could be a lot of indicators of effective teaching. Did you ever go to another culture? Did you ever live in another culture? That might be an indicator of effective teaching. Could be a lot of things. So we tried to start with assets within the Palau teaching workforce, and we don't start from some other place. If you were to do that, it could be that you would say that there are no effective teachers in Palau. If you just use the U.S. indicators of effectiveness, are you highly proficient in the content area you're teaching? When I say that to the minister says, Philip, I take any associate's degree, they're in criminal justice, you're in. You're in any field. If you have an associate's degree, you're in. The problem with that, these are persistent problems. If a government job comes up in the middle of the year, in the middle of the semester, that pays $10 more per month, that teacher leaves. Because they graduated in criminal justice anyway. They weren't per se about teaching. So what we're trying to do is construct a teacher pipeline from high school to community college into the classroom with learning, commitment, support, and empathy for these struggling teachers throughout that process. This is called Naha Pena A'o. It's a kind of reform, it's a kind of idea within the Hawaiian Department of Education, within the Office of Hawaiian Education. This is interesting because these are principles that have been identified and approved by the Board of Education. One thing about Hawaii, there's one education system statewide. There's like one district for all of the islands are in the same school system. This program from the Office of Hawaiian Education is meant to go for every student in Hawaii, but not just students, every staff member, from teachers to principals to the lunch lady to the janitors to whatever school staff. So it's principles about what they want schooling to be like. So it's for students who are not Hawaiian. It's for students who are Hawaiian. It's for whites, it's for Filipinos, it's for Japanese. That's a very complicated mix in Hawaii. The leader of this group, the Office of Hawaiian Education, she told me, Philip, whenever they think it's about Hawaiian and for Hawaiian students, and the Hawaiian, she calls it the Hawaiian student ghetto, then they don't care. It's not threatening. It's not a big issue for them. But when it's meant to be something about students learn better when they understand where they are from, when they understand Hawaii, then it becomes a very complicated issue. But it's past the board of ed, and it's a multi-year process. But here's what it looks like: a strengthened sense of belonging, a strengthened sense of responsibility, excellence. The bottom one is one we're going to talk about: strengthened sense of aloha, total well-being, including physical, emotional, mental, and a strengthened sense of Hawai'i. And when I talked earlier, I said that one of the things that they're advancing is this is what's missing from a lot of our education. It's not a Hawaiian native education issue. And this is what I meant by that. If schools focused in part on this, they're not saying don't focus on math, don't focus on reading. It's not an either or. They are very reasoned about how these ideas might become something in a complex, diverse system like Hawaii Department of Education. This is a U.S. state. So they have, and one of the things about working with the Hawaiian leaders is they talk in long, you were talking about this, Karen, they talk in long term. We're planting the seeds. I have a 20-year idea, she says, But 20 years ago, they were not learning in Hawaiian. 20 years later, 15 years later, they're learning in Hawaiian. So she might be right. And she was one of the ones who started that movement. A sense of aloha. They talk about a pedagogy of aloha. I was talking to Mary a little bit about this at the party the other night. I think people misunderstand when Hawaiians say aloha, what that might actually be. I was at a conference last week in Chicago called the Culturally Responsive Assessment and Evaluation. By the way, from what I've seen of Ontario and some of the people in this room, it's about 300 people. It's run by the University of Illinois in downtown Chicago. This is the third one. There are people in this room, I think, who might really be interested and benefit from this conference. It's called CREA, Culturally Responsive Evaluation and Assessment. When they talk about aloha, when some Hawaiians talk about aloha, the nearest what I was saying, one way to think about it might be when we use the word God. God means so many different things to so many of us, and it encompasses a lot of things for us, right? Justice, mercy, love, the reason for life, the spirit, all of that. When Hawaiians talk about aloha, they often mean something closer to that. And when they talk about a pedagogy of aloha, one of the primary things there is a sense of belonging and a sense of empathy, which is I am responsible for my learners. They are responsible for me. We are connected through this place, through our history, through our goals. And they're developing this idea of a pedagogy of aloha and what that might be like. This is not aloha. Aloha was not invented by Pepsi. I will say, I said I'm 4 years in Hawaii and whatever, and I'm not Hawaiian, but when you think about what aloha means to people and you see shit like this, it really is, it's rough to see. And they use this one not only in California, but in Hawaii. So what do we do with HA? We support the Office of Hawaiian Education as they try to develop and cultivate this framework and think through it. We engage in what's called design-based research with them. We try to understand settings that are hawful. Ha, they use ha for everything. That's awesome. But one of the things we were saying, and this is where, Pat, we're trying to be reasonable about research, which is saying, so if there's this, if Ha is this thing, these principles that that you want to cultivate and that you believe are, in many cases, are already there, how would we know that they're here to a greater degree or in a different quality than here? And then could we say that schools that are organized more in this way have different kinds of outcomes? And remember, the outcomes are not just for students, they're for staff. So one of the things we have in Hawaii is what's called haole teachers. Teachers from outside the island are recruited heavily because there's a big teacher shortage. But the problem is that they leave within a year. And one of the things they're wondering about is if schools were organized more like this, could we even look at the teacher retention in the schools? Could we look at student sense of belonging and then student achievement? Could we look at some of these things, right? It's in the early stage. I want to thank you for your attention, and I'm not sure I covered everything that I might have wanted to, but I hope that you get a little bit of sense of what we're trying to do.